Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on what, for me at least, is a slightly grey and autumnal Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. It would be lovely actually in the chat to share with us where you're joining us from. Do let us know, or feel free to share it if you're talking about Wigtown on Twitter or in your questions on YouTube as well. My name is Eleanor, and I have the great pleasure of chairing today's Wigtown YA event with Adiba Jaigirdar, and we're going to be discussing her wonderful novel, Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating. So just a little bit of an introduction. Adiba is a Bangladeshi and Irish writer and teacher, and you currently live in, I was about to say Dublin. Not everyone in Ireland lives in Dublin.
I do live in Dublin, yes.
Excellent. I took a wild guess, and yeah, sorry. My other half is Irish as well, so he would tell me off for that. But your writing is, you're in your biography, your writing is strongly aided by tea. You do a lot of reading, you play video games, rant about the ills of colonialism, and that's very important. But also expand your ever-flowing lipstick collection, which you're sporting today. Which is
yes.
In our little brief chat before this evening, I also asked you, and do for free as well to share this with us if you'd like to, but you're currently playing the latest Assassin's Creed and reading A Faux Love Story by Lone Lee.
Mm-hmm. And they're both quite good, yes.
Both good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just finished, like I mentioned to you before, I just finished Winter's Orbit, which is, if anyone is a sci-fi, space opera, fantastical, slightly tech, there's a lot of little elements in there. It's really brilliantly written, and also very strongly attempts to address diversity within sci-fi, but really, really great. And as I was saying to Adiba, I was thanking her for saving me from a potential book slump, because this is a really, really lovely story of Hani and Ishu. And so let me just tell you all how our next, I'd like to say hour, it's probably going to be about 50 minutes if we're honest, because of course we have to leave a really good chunk of time for all your questions at the end. If you have questions, you don't have to hold them in your brain. If we're all in a room, you'd have to bite your tongue, or I don't know, get a notebook out and write it down, or write it onto your phone. But the upside of us all joining in electronically is that you can put it in to the chat and to the comments the moment it occurs to you. And then we'll be able to share your questions with Adiba at the end of today's discussion. So yeah, we are going to chat about the book. Adiba's going to give us a very nice little brief reading so you can meet our wonderful characters, and then we will, as I said, we'll end with some questions from you. So do feel free to share this over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. So I wanted to just kind of lead with a first question, and then you'll give us a little bit of a reading after that. What I've in a variety of authors I've spoken to, they talk about how novels are a kind of culmination of different ideas coming together. And I wondered, with that in mind, how did Hani and Ishu kind of come to be?
So Hani and Ishu originally started with the idea of the fake dating trope, because I love tropes. I think they're one of the best things about writing romance and reading romance. And when I was a little bit younger, I think I was just in my late teens, possibly early 20s, I was watching this TV show called Faking It on MTV. And, I enjoyed the show. I was really into it, but I was quite disappointed by the way that sexuality was handled in the show. So as I was watching, I have a list of ideas, and I wrote down that I want to write, a sapphic fake dating book. But at the time I didn't know how to do it. So I guess the idea kind of percolated in my brain for a long time. And then, I asked myself a lot of questions, why would these two girls be fake dating? What would be the reason? And once I had my answer, I basically had the book. And it was quite a quick process writing it, actually. So yeah, just that seed of an idea, the fake dating plot, that was really it.
Yeah, it's really nice that you had that idea and then you kind of filed it away until the dots kind of join themselves. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, would you like to share a little bit of the book with everyone?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to read a brief part of a chapter from Hani's perspective. So at this point, Hani and Ishu, they haven't really started the fake dating plot yet, but they're getting there. So Ishita leads me away from the classroom and to a deserted corner of the hallway lined with lockers. So she pulls her arms over her chest, like I'm the one who dragged her here and not the other way around. So, did you tell your friends the truth? Not yet, I sigh. Sorry, I mean, I was just going to. That probably doesn't make me sound any better, considering I leapt out of my seat as soon as Ishita appeared. Don't. Ishita's voice is stern. I mean, look, I was thinking, and maybe we should give your plan a try. She shrugs, her voice sounding so casual that makes me suspicious. And what made you change your mind? I just had a change of heart. I want to help you out. She looks at me like she's doing me a huge favor. If it was anyone else, I would believe that they were doing it out of the goodness of their heart. But Ishita? Right, I scoff. Cough up the real reason. Come on. What's in it for you? She finally drops her arms to her sides and says, I need to be head girl. It's so unexpected that I can only blink at her for a full minute. What? Head girl. I want to be head girl. Since when? You've never cared about that stuff. Yeah, well, I care now. And people like you. She frowns at me like she doesn't quite understand why they do, but she's willing to entertain it. You're like friends with everyone. So if we pretended to date and you put in a good word for me and you would play along with my friends, yes, Ishita nods. Totally, like whatever you, well, she stops herself before she can finish her sentence. Not whatever you want. Within reason, obviously. You know you're going to have to pretend to like me, right? I ask. And if you want to be head girl, you'll also have to pretend that you like other people. Ishita scrunches up her face as if she's in pain. Yeah, she grunts. I know. I want to ask her more, but I doubt Ishita will answer. She looks like she barely wants to be having this conversation with me now. Should I come over after school? We can figure out all the logistics and no. Ishita cuts me off. I mean, maybe I should come over to yours. You said you're out to your parents, right? You know we're just going to talk, right? Figure this out, not just give me your address. Ishita has already taken her phone out of the pocket of her shirt. She looks up at me expectantly. I sigh, wondering for a moment if this is worth it. Ishita Dey is not exactly a ball of sunshine. We're so far from friends that I'm not sure how we'd go about doing this thing together. I rattle off my address anyway. This may be the only way to convince everyone that I know who I am and what I want.
Thank you for that. That was a good extract, I think. It really gets across their different personalities. That's something I really loved about the book, actually. The way that we're introduced to Hani is through Ishita's eyes as well, which was really it was really done very well. And the two of them as well, and the roles that they maybe feel they have to play a bit at school because they're the only two girls is it Bangladesh backgrounds, or they're both actually from Bangladesh, or their families are?
They're from, I mean, they're both Bengali. So Ishu is Indian Bengali and then Hani is Bangladeshi Bengali. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there's the kind of undercurrent throughout the book, and this is going to be spoiler free, by the way, everyone. We're going to try so hard. I had notes like can't mention that. But there's the point of reference is that when they, I think it was when Ishita joined the school, Hani was already there, and she was the one who was asked to show her around, as if no one else could do the job, and they're the only, I suppose, girls of color in the class. And was that an interesting element that you wanted to actually add into the story? Is that something that you actually experienced personally, or is there something else that you wanted to get across there?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I have experienced. And so something that, yeah, I did want to explore, because I think a lot of people of color have this experience where you are kind of expected to just get along with people who are like of the same ethnicity of you, the same, race, this, like, if they're from a similar background. But obviously, just because you're from the same ethnicity doesn't mean that you have anything in common. So I think, like, I remember when I was in school, we did have a very diverse school, but when a person of color came into the school, they were expected to like get along with the other people of color. They were expected to be shown around by the other people of color. I mean, I guess in a way, like it can be nice because, you know, maybe those people like they have a better understanding of, you know, where you're coming from or where you're experiencing, but it can also be, you know, it can be a little bit alienating at the same time because you know why you're being asked to hang out with the other people of color. So yeah, it's an experience that I think a lot of people have, and I really wanted to explore that.
So you were trying to, you at the heart of it, you started with the sapphic kind of fake dating premise, and then there were lots of kind of underlying elements that you were bringing into it. So within kind of representation, not just from the sapphic background, but obviously within from a cultural aspect as well. And you know, we will come to other issues around kind of or conversations around kind of diversity and YA a little bit later on. But there's so much there, and what I think is what you've mentioned earlier about how you didn't quite know how to go about it, and then you just needed to sit with the idea for a little bit, but you've approached it so well. It makes so much sense for both of them. And what I really like is also the dynamics they each have with their families is so different, and the way that you get that across as well. And I suppose, you know, was there any particular decisions when you were thinking about both of their families? Were there things that just fell into place straight away, or were there things that you deliberately made specific choices?
I definitely made specific choices. So I think something I did when I was writing this book that I'd never really done before, and I don't know if I'll do it in the future,
Okay.
is that in creating the characters of Hani and Ishu, I was creating them out of their differences. So, you know, Ishu came first because obviously her chapter begins the book, and that's how it was when I started writing. So, you know, immediately Ishu was this kind of abrasive personality. And then I thought, well, okay, so Hani has to be the exact opposite. So she has to be kind of like very kind, very sweet. So then, you know, as I learned more about Ishu, I also learned more about Hani just because she had to be the opposite. And then it, you know, it was the same when I got to a Hani chapter. I was also thinking, well, if Hani is like this, what exactly is Ishu like? So that was a very deliberate decision I made, that I knew one of the things I really wanted to show was that just because you are brown, just because you're Bengali, you're from a specific background, doesn't mean you are the same person. You know, you can be so different and still be, you know, from the same culture, which Hani and Ishu are.
You know, now you've mentioned it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense, because they are complete opposites. But then of course you have the premise that opposites attract, and you know, then the storyline. No spoilers, no spoilers. So I mean, maybe coming back to the families and their relationships with the families and their different communities, what you've done, which I think adds right from the start, right from the first chapter, you've kind of interwoven elements of the cultural representation just with the choice of language, which I thought made perfect sense. But you didn't also add certain elements that some books do, where they translate or they add explanations. You just went straight for it, and then, you know, obviously just at some point the reader becomes comfortable with that language, and I'm assuming that was also just a deliberate choice on your part as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, when I tried to write, I tried to center myself. So actually, in the first draft of this book, there was even more Bengali in the book. There were like, I know there's already like a couple of sentences, but there were like entire paragraphs, especially because sometimes, because obviously, like I do speak Bengali, sometimes I'm trying to translate the rhythm of how somebody is speaking Bengali to English. So it's easier to do it by writing it in Bengali and then think about it in English later on. So I always try to write with myself at the center. And then when I kind of have a little bit more distance from the story, I go back and I think like, okay, so if somebody non-Bengali were reading it, you know, what kind of context might they need? And then I kind of add that in or take whatever needs to be taken away. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I am, you know, writing stories about people like me. So I want to center people like me when I'm writing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very, just from the language perspective, and it's interesting that, like you say, you had an earlier draft with a lot more and then you ended up stripping it back. But of course it makes perfect sense that when adults are in the room, they're going to talk Bengali, they're not going to talk in English. And language is something that is kind of runs right through the book as well, even right down to the girls' names.
Mhm.
And I think there's specifically with Hani's, because her full name is it's Humara.
Mhm.
But very few people actually call her that. And then there's the name that her school friends call her, and then there's the name that her family call her. And I think at one point she does address like the shift that she feels she has to go through
Mhm.
from like one role to the other. Do you feel that that plays a strong part in as you said just then about centering yourself, or being able to see what that experience is like on the page as well?
Yeah, for sure. And like honestly, I think naming is a very important cultural aspect. It's very important in Bengali culture, but I know it's important in also other cultures. And so, naming conventions in Bengali is like what Honey has, where you have a name, and that's the name that people in general call you. But then you have another name, and that's what your friends, your close friends, and your family call you. And it's supposed to be like a kind of endearment. So that is kind of what Honey is experiencing. So I did want to kind of explore what these naming conventions are, but also, how names can really play a part in how we experience the world and how we experience family and friendship.
Yeah, I think that I don't think this is a spoiler to say, but as the girls get to know each other, but I think it originally comes from a cultural perspective when Ishu says to Honey, but your name isn't Myra. Why'd you let them call you that? And she's like, oh, but my name is. It always has been. She's like, but no. And it's that she has, I mean, from Ishu, we know from chapter 1, she's very focused. She knows what she wants. She sees things in a very certain way. And there is a real brilliant kind of black and whiteness to her. She doesn't mess around. But then of course, knowing what she actually wants is a whole other kind of kettle of fish. It's like, and I'll definitely go for it. I'll just be right back with you when I know what I want. And it's interesting, after knowing her for only a short period of time, she's one of the first people, and probably one of the only people, who could actually say that to her and understand the full cultural context of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I realized that was an anecdote and there wasn't any question in there. Sorry about that. So what was also what I really liked were the different family community the Dawat events and the kind of feasts and parties that were kind of, it felt like they were at kind of different intervals within the book, and I think they really added a kind of a community side of it, and also it was a strong counterpoint to I suppose the school setting as well, and the home setting. Was that a way of being able to reflect the fact that the way that the different community kind of the Bengali come together and celebrate within each other's homes, and that's just a regular thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it wasn't necessarily me deliberately wanting to explore that, but it is, it's a part of my life, because when you're Bengali, it's just kind of a given that that's what you do. You have a lot of like dawats, you have like parties like that. So I just wanted to be authentic to the stories of these girls. And actually, I think in the first half of the book, the chapter with the dawat wasn't even there. And then I was thinking, like, it seems kind of unrealistic that they would not have even a single one during the entire book. So I went back and I added it in because I thought it was really important. Yeah, so I was just trying to, authentically explore what the life of Bengali girls looks like.
Yeah, no, I think, well, first of all, full confession, obviously I have no idea, but I think it just felt a very natural way of being able to, because the way that the girls are just like, oh, okay, I'll just go along. And also, I suppose the fact that the level of importance placed on family and integration within the community, as opposed to probably a slightly more kind of white and Western perspective, where if your parents dragged you along to a party that their parents would have, there would be, eyes rolling, maybe like playing on the phone constantly. It would be a very different feel to it, at least, in probably like my experiences, but also from books that I read as well. So it had a really interesting kind of counterpoint there. The bulk of the book, and obviously everything, is about relationships and friendships, and obviously the importance and the value of what friendship really is and what it can be. And I suppose within a contemporary YA book, that element is it's one of the more important lessons that we all experience and we all go through when we're in school. Was that something that you wanted to look at after you had the henna wars, or is that something that just kind of found its way into the idea of the sapphic fake dating premise?
Yeah, I think as I was writing it, I wasn't thinking too much about it, but after I finished writing, I realized that it was actually kind of cathartic to kind of write about friendships in that way because, when I was younger and when I was in school, I had a lot of rocky friendships for, one reason or the other. And I realized that I hadn't really seen a lot of media or read a lot of media that had explored that. Thankfully, we do have more of that now, which is great. But I think we're still lacking in seeing what that looks like when you are, a person of color, when you are queer, when you are Muslim, and those identities do add certain nuances. So I think for me it was like kind of going back into when I was a teenager and kind of looking at what my friendships looked like and what were the problems with my friendships, and kind of adding those elements into the book. And I just kind of hope that teenagers now who are dealing with those things, and who don't know how to navigate those kinds of friendships, can pick up books like these and kind of learn the language of all of that.
I very much agree. I very much agree. Being able to, like you say, navigate a rocky friendship, or at least be able to work out, that it's not necessarily the first thought that there's a particular person to blame, or and be able to work out what comes next. No, absolutely. I think it should be the kind of book that would be, recommended for. Get it all in school libraries, everyone. Sorry. It's just a really, really lovely book, and I think when we're talking about, obviously teenagers who are going through these particular experiences and in school, and even without the current circumstances that we're going through, secondary school is a very difficult time to navigate, and having kind of friends and allies on your side can make it so very important. So within the idea of friendships and being able to know what's going on with Ishu, she starts the book trying to work out what she wants to do, and I'm trying to phrase this without giving any spoilers, just in case you wondered why I was hesitating. And like you read in your, which was a very helpful reading that you gave there, because I was trying to ascertain how much you were going to reveal. But her main motivation is that she needs to be head girl. We won't share why. You can, if you want to find that out, pick up the book. But she wants to be a head girl, and she, as a person, as we mentioned, she's very focused, she's very determined, she's a very, very good student, but she doesn't have many friends. Like she says to Hani, your people like you. Emphasis on that's her way of saying it, not you're popular, you've got loads of friends, people like you, meaning they don't like her, because she's never really tried to get them to like her. She doesn't really care about that. And it's what really interesting is she doesn't really even want them to like her. She just wants them to vote for her to be her girl. And it does take her on this really big journey. And without going, I suppose, into too much into her motivations and her family life, that in and of itself, trying to work out what you're working towards and why you want to do that at such a young age. We are on the because it's set in Ireland, and they are taking their equivalent of the, I suppose in England it would be A levels, and in Scotland it's the Scottish Highers. So it's the exam to get into university.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're 17, 18.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, that kind of age where you feel like you're making a decision that will change the rest of your life. No pressure, anybody. There's a lot riding on it. And do you feel that level of, like, I suppose, kind of life pressure at that age certainly plays a role in how both of the girls kind of go through that particular decision and the investment that they have in it?
Yeah, definitely. I think my sister actually is currently, she's turning 18 and she's about to do her leaving cert. So I guess I kind of have like, when I did my leaving cert, it was a couple of years back, so I guess, as I was even writing the book, I had a pretty solid view into what that looks like. And I think it's so much pressure you're feeling, and it is very difficult to be asked to make a major life-changing decision like that when you are at that very young age and you still haven't, figured out who you are or who you want to be, but you're kind of being asked to tie yourself to, like, something in university that is going to be your career, for the rest of your life. And I think, this happens a lot in like Bengali households where you are, pressured. You're pressured to like go to university to have a good career, mostly because your parents want you to be stable, which a lot of immigrant parents didn't have that stability. And I think that definitely played a big role in how both of the characters related to everything in the book, because with Honey, she's a second generation immigrant, so she kind of has that advantage of having had stability in her life because she was born in Ireland. She doesn't know the experience of being an immigrant. Whereas with Ishu, her parents immigrated when she was a child to Ireland. So she very much knows what it is like to have an unstable life, to be an immigrant, and what it looks like when you don't have a good career, when you don't have that financial stability. And yeah, like it was, I was thinking a lot about, because I'm an immigrant as well. And I moved to Ireland when I was a kid. So I knew what that looked like. So I was very much trying to go back to those things as I was writing the book.
That very clearly, it's definitely in there, just in case you were you were wondering. I think that almost certainly comes across. I was going to say, I think you're completely right. There's a lot of pressure at that particular age to make such a difficult decision, but then of course taking into account everything else, outside of, not saying, just school or just having parents who want you to make a good choice. There, like you said, there's the community and the idea of, being an immigrant and having to build on what has come before, and maybe being able to take full advantage of all of that. There's a lot going on there, and there is another kind of subplot that kind of addresses that as well, which I think is a really good reflection. What I wanted to say is that what's really nice that runs throughout the book is the way that the girls, in their very different ways, really enjoy their cultural background and the community that they're part of. There's never really between the two of them, and I suppose that family space and that community space, there's just a real openness and honesty about that there, and that's really nice to have that in there, because of course you could say that is a counterpoint, maybe unintentionally or deliberately, to how Hani and Ishu are seen from a more of their kind of their white friends. There's a particular scene, for example, where their friends are thinking about going for food, and Hani eats halal, but then her friend's like, oh, she'll just eat vegetarian, and it's just the way that Ishu doesn't want to budge, and it's like, no, here's a list of halal food places we can go and eat. And it's almost like a kind of locking of wills there to be able to see who's going to kind of give in. But did you always want to have a kind of natural affection for the community and the background and the religion but not even irrespective of whether there was going to be a contrast with the more kind of white Western perspective?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even in the Henna Wars, that is something that, I wanted to be central to the characters and the plot. And I think, like, mainly because, again, when I was younger, there were no books with, not even Bengali characters, with people of color in general. But even now, I think a lot of the times when we watch media, because obviously, TV shows, movies, they are unfortunately more popular than books. We watch media, but even often when we read media, we find that a lot of cultures are not represented in a celebratory way, especially being Muslim. I see Islam as often like shown as something that is like oppressive, as something that Muslim characters don't necessarily gravitate towards, and I remember when I was younger, and because I didn't have any representation, and or that was the only representation I saw, I wanted to distance myself from my culture and my religion. And then, thankfully, as I grew older and I kind of learned more, and I, met more people who were from my background, I began to understand that there is so much to celebrate in my culture and my religion. So that is really, what I always want to produce, just works that celebrate what is there to celebrate, because Bengali culture is what I've grown up with, and it is, I think it's amazing. As with all cultures, there are problems within it, but I think it's brilliant. So yeah, I just always want to show that representation that unfortunately is often missing from media, where we do get to celebrate our cultures and our religions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we said earlier the diversity within YA is it's a conversation that people are having. It's a conversation that people need to, rather than just saying, oh, we need to work on the diversity, rather than maybe what's interesting is obviously in the last few years, maybe there's more conversations around it, that actually more people pulling the actual numbers on the number of writers being published, as well as the number of characters that are on the page. And I think that it was very clearly, they're both clearly very, very fond of their communities, which I just thought was a really nice part of it. It's just being proud of that was really, really lovely. Just to say, everyone, time has flown by, and we're going to keep chatting. I mean, we could keep chatting for a while. There's probably no problems there whatsoever. But if you do have questions, do share them with us, and we will come to them in about 5-10 minutes, and then I'll be able to pass them on to Adiba. So do get them in. So, so diving back into diversity of YA after that brief segue. Woo, just I can completely, it's obviously, it's an ongoing conversation from a variety of different people, and I'm not even going to begin to say that I can completely relate at all. I'm also just maybe realizing how much younger than me you are, if you took your leaving certificate just a few years ago.
I think when I said a few years ago, I was under exaggerating a little bit. It was quite a few years ago.
Oh, okay. I feel a little bit better. I was like, how many books has she written? What was she writing when she did her A-levels? But when you were thinking, when did you actually start with the Henna Wars? Did you always want to be a writer, or was that something that you kind of gravitated towards because of the maybe subconscious desire to contribute to that whole gap, the very big gap within representation, to help other young people of a similar background to yourself to be able to see themselves in the books that you write?
I always did want to be a writer, but until just before writing the Henna Wars, until about 2017, I had never written people of color into stories or books. And I think, that definitely had to do with what I was reading and, what I was watching. I think subconsciously, I believe that, people of color couldn't be in stories, because I grew up in Bangladesh, and in Bangladesh, I never met any white people, but I was writing about white people. So it's very interesting looking back at that, and I was writing about American high schools, even though Bangladeshi schools were very different. So I was just writing about all these things that I had never ever experienced, but I thought that was the only way to write stories. And even after moving to Ireland, for a long time, that is just all I wrote. And I think slowly, again, as I kind of began to learn more about my culture and my religion, began to meet more people from a similar background to me, I kind of figured, why shouldn't I be, writing about people like me? What is the problem if I do? And I think, again, it did become something kind of cathartic, because I could go back and explore a lot of things that, I couldn't express when I was a kid because I didn't have the language. And I think that's why I kind of gravitated towards YA books, because a lot of those things, a lot of those feelings are tied up to when I was a teenager, when I was younger, but I didn't have the language to express all of it. And now I do, so I can express it. So yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I think I really only thought about being a published writer once I started writing people of color. And I think that was because at that time there was, you know, the big diversity movement, especially in the US, with We Need Diverse Books just kind of starting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, because that probably did appear around 2017, but no, we need diverse books, and lots of other really brilliant initiatives that do empower those voices. We Need Diverse Books, by the way, has a really brilliant anthology. So if anyone wants to read any books from other writers of color, do check out We Need Diverse Books. For sure, have some fantastic writers, and their website will give you loads of other recommendations. So do please go have a look at that as well. So it's 7:40. You've got a few more minutes, everyone, if you want to get your questions in. I would like to discuss obviously there's going to be key areas in the book, and you have I suppose warnings at the beginning of what the book is going to actually contain as well, without obviously discussing the particular. There's a significant event that you probably know that I'm referring to towards the end of the book, that looks at the dynamic between the staff and the pupils, but also it asks big questions around racial microaggressions, quality, and, to be honest, less microaggressions, but actually kind of that, not, you could probably call it racism, to be honest, because there are decisions made and actions that adults take that are not, well, don't even begin by saying they're not fair. They're just wrong, full stop. So there's so much going on in the book that we've already touched upon in terms of the cultural conversations and the relationships between the girls, and obviously that reflection of the teenage experience and navigating I want to say the experience of high school, but the you know, navigating secondary school. And then on top of that, there are these kinds of ongoing issues, and I think it made perfect sense when we reached to that point that would happen. But I suppose at the same time we should be asking ourselves, you know, it shouldn't really be the case at all. And I wondered, had you always intended on having something that you could probably want to reflect those particular actions that you may have experienced or witnessed? Was that something actually important for you that you wanted to have in there, or is that something you felt actually worked with the overall kind of overarching plot as well?
I think, like with a lot of the rest of the story, it wasn't something that I set out to write or set out to do. I wrote it because it felt authentic to the story, and it felt like a natural progression of the story of the two characters. But then, you know, again, after I had kind of written it and I look back, I was like, oh, like I actually know why this is what I landed on, because you know, I know people who had similar experiences, thankfully not as bad, but similar experiences, you know, when they were in school. Not me personally, again, thankfully. But, you know, because I had heard so many stories from my friends or seen so many things, I think it just made sense that I did write it. And what is actually interesting is, after I wrote it, I remember calling up a friend of mine, and who is Muslim, not Bengali, but I called her and I said, so I just wrote this into my book. Do you think people will believe it's realistic? And as I said this, I also said, but I know people who have had these experiences, but do you think people will believe it's realistic? And she was kind of like, yeah, like, I think so. I mean, you've experienced it. But it was difficult for me to try and reconcile the experiences that, you know, I know that people have had with what I was writing into the story for some reason.
I certainly thought that it felt that it was realistic, absolutely. But I think that it's like you say, it also fit perfectly well with the plot. So it certainly feels that it was a natural progression, but it's interesting that you didn't have those thoughts until after you'd written it. And there's a chance maybe that if you had those questions beforehand, maybe you wouldn't have written it in the same way, possibly.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is,
possibly.
you know, but now we'll never know, because it's in there and there's no going back. But no, I think that certainly it contributes to the, you know, the other important conversations that, I mean, there's so many conversations that, you know, this particular book could actually obviously offer within, you know, for example, a classroom context. And that absolutely is something to be able to that we want to be able to have. So so this is your second novel as well, and you didn't write Hani and Ishu within the last 18 months, she says. you wrote no. So you didn't have to try and write this particular book during a global pandemic.
No, but I did have to revise it during the pandemic.
How was that?
It was incredibly difficult because actually I very vividly remember revising this book because it was such a difficult experience for me. And it wasn't even like major revisions. They were actually quite simple at the end of the day. But I was revising in May 2020, so quite early on into the pandemic, right as the Henna Wars had come out in the US. So, you know, I remember I would spend like all day doing like virtual events, promoting my book, and then I would like go and try to revise the book. And it was also Ramadan, so I was fasting. So it was a very
oh my god,
like
it was during Ramadan as well. It's like the worst timing. You're like, okay, I have to do all my revisions after I've eaten a whole pizza, just watching out the wwindow, waiting for the sun to go down.
But that is kind of how I did it, because I was like so tired during the day. I would literally like obviously I had like virtual events, so I would be doing them during the day, and then every time I could sleep, I would just be sleeping, and then I would stay up at night and I would like revise the book. So it was a very difficult revision process, and I think definitely because of the pandemic as well. But the writing process was a lot easier than the revision process.
the writing process by comparison sounds like it was, you know, like, oh, carefree. We'll just write this book. Nothing's going on. I don't have to worry about, you know, the rest of the world. Just think about myself and my book. Kind of an interesting counterpoint. So when we say it was carefree and wonderful, there's I suppose conversations around how difficult it can be to write your second book. Did you find that you came across creating your second child to be hard? Was it more challenging than Henna Wars, for example?
No, it was actually, and every time I say this, I feel like I have to apologize to every single author, but actually this was the easiest book that I've ever written, and it will probably be the easiest book I've ever written. And part of the reason was because I wrote it in 2019 before like even like proof copies of the Henna Wars had gone out. So, you know, I had not had any kind of reader feedback. I didn't have like anybody's voices in my head. It was just me. So, you know, I got to write the book. You know, I got to put out my debut. And then with my third and fourth book, that is when I'm experiencing a lot of self-doubt. So with this book, no.
Now, yeah. I think you're right. I think, yeah, getting the chance to write the second book before you've done the kind of the press and probably had to talk to audiences and start making a more of a name for yourself as a writer, and then having, yeah, maybe a bit more might write on the third and the fourth. Are you working on the third and the fourth at the moment?
Yes.
Can you say anything?
Yeah, I can. My third book, actually, I have turned in hopefully all my revisions for it. And it is my first historical. It's called A Million to One, and it's about these four girls who board the Titanic to steal a rare jewel-encrusted collection of poetry by Omar Khayyam. And it has like a little sapphic romance subplot there as well. So
I love it. It's like a jewelry heist and a sapphic love plot on the Titanic. So this iceberg is looming. The iceberg is like a metaphorical pandemic. You probably read that. You didn't realize. And yeah, no, I love that. That's great. And there's four of them. I love that.
Yes, there's four characters. Yeah. So that was an experience having to, because I had to like write in the past tense for the first time. I had to write in third person perspective with four voices. So it was definitely a challenge, but hopefully I have pulled it off. And then after that, I have another contemporary novel, which is called Donut Fall in Love. And it's about this Bangladeshi Irish girl called Shirin, who has just broken up with her ex-girlfriend, and she decides to enter this great British Bake Off style reality TV show competition. But when she's there, she realizes that her ex is a competitor, and so is a new girl that she's developing feelings for.
Oh my goodness, you've got a historical novel were the highest and separate moments, and then we've got a contemporary based on the Bake Off. They're both brilliant. I think that they're both fantastic. I'm glad you're able to describe them all in great detail as well. 9 times out of 10, it's just saying, "Are you writing something?" And then the author can say, "Yes, but I can't tell you anything about it because I haven't pitched it or finished it, and it could be terrible, and no one may want it." But that's really great. I was wondering, given what you were saying earlier about your childhood in Bangladesh, would you write a novel and actually set it in that city? You wouldn't necessarily set it in Ireland or in the UK or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to write that. I think, it's a bit difficult because obviously when I lived in Bangladesh, I think I left Bangladesh when I was 10. So, and I've been back a couple of times, but it's been, Bangladesh is a rapidly developing country and it changes so much every time I go back to visit. So, I just, if I do ever write that book, I would, want to really make sure that I was doing justice to the Bangladesh of today, not the Bangladesh that I remember from my childhood.
Okay. Yes, because you tend to remember certain things in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I suppose I was wondering, I'm now seeing a lot of books because I grew up in the 90s, and I'm seeing a lot of books that are now teenage dramas set in contemporary YA in the 90s, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about being, going back to it's that would be full immersion if you were set it in maybe in the Bangladesh that you actually did know and grow up in. But yeah, there's an interesting way of being able to approach it. So we are coming to, I think we're coming to the end of our wonderful event. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. You have heard so much today about Adiba's current novel, Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating, and her 2 wonderful books that you have coming out. I'm going to be bookmarking for the historical one. I think that's going to be brilliant. And yeah, there's going to be probably far more lovely treats to come. Thank you very much to the Wigtown Book Festival for hosting this event, for putting it together, especially having the hybrid festival at the moment. Thank you for joining us, and do remember that you can purchase the lovely Hani and Ishu in the festival bookshop. And just to also mention that the Wigtown Book Festival, they are, half of their event income comes from ticket sales, and of course this year and last year it was a very different circumstance, and they do have a much reduced program. If you are able to do so, the festival will be eternally grateful if you were able to donate to them, and especially if you were able to book your ticket to listen to the lovely Adiba for free. You got so much for your money, and you can find details of how to donate to the festival on the website, which is wigtownbookfestival.com. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, Adiba. That was so great. I hope that you enjoyed that as well. And thank you very much for creating Hani and Ishu. And I don't know, maybe you'll revisit them later on. Would you write a story of them when they're later on in life?
Yeah, I would definitely consider it. Yeah, they're characters that are very close to my heart. So yes, and thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. And now I'm already thinking about, what would it be like, and what would they be like when they're older? And now I'm like, the big question would be would they be together or not? There we go. I'll leave that one that one in your very capable and expert hands. Right. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday evening, and do go to wigtownbookfestival.com to enjoy the rest of the festival. Got the last few days coming up.